how is it that a lot of people live these lives which are a lot smaller than what they actually kind of should be living according to their higher self? Many of us are stuck in something which is very small and very kind of strenuous and very hard and even feels wrong. And yet we can't seem to get out of that wrong life. So the reason is there are almost like, I mean, it's a massive oversimplification here, but let's imagine there are two major forces at play here. One of them is our wonderful incarnated divinity. Like, this is what we are, right? We're all incarnated divinity in some shape or form. So we have descended here into these human beings, into this human form. We carry this spark of God within us. And we all have that. Nobody can take this away from us. But yet, once we do descend into the density of this 3D reality, we also need to adhere to the rules of the game here. And those rules are not written by, well, okay, let's not go into who is written by, but these rules are there to not make it easy for us, so to say. Those rules are such that we all have this slave program within us. For the simplicity, we divided the free spirit empowered being program, which is also the creator being, we can come to that later, and a slave being. And I guess you already can guess what goes where, right? The fear, the abandonment, the feeling of being worthless, the feeling of not achieving very much, the constant striving for more, but kind of constantly failing, not being able to buy that car or afford that flat, and like all sorts of things that we're stuck in here in the day-to-day. A lot of them come from that slave kind of mentality, kind of existence. And we actually even know it on a subconscious level. And then we have these moments of our lives where we follow our divinity and we feel incredibly creative, incredibly powerful, and incredibly happy, right? And it's not the kind of happiness that comes from buying another expensive thing. There's the kind of happiness that comes from the joy of the heart when we do happen to follow what our heart really wants. So, in the nutshell, these are the two energies. And so often we're just stuck in that small slave mentality mindset without even noticing. And the problem with being stuck in there is that because in it, we actually are small, as if this whole big, big, big consciousness now had to fit into this tiny, tiny existence with these tiny issues, with the tiny problems, with the tiny whatever. And it's on a loop of constant dissatisfaction. The loop is of constantly feeling not good enough. And literally, no matter what you do, you will feel not good enough. You can get the Nobel Prize and still feel not good enough. Being that tiny creature within this cage of a slave mentality. Once you get out of the cage, you actually immediately grow because the cosmic consciousness and the divine consciousness that we are, it just doesn't need to be like this. It can be any size, really. It can also be anything and anyone they want and have any kind of life that kind of fits that. So it's oversimplifying, but I don't know if that makes any sense. So basically, the smaller you make yourself, the more this cage feels big and strong and powerful. And it does have all the power over you. And then the bigger you are, the less this cage even matter. Right? So you step out of the lack mentality, you step out of the pain mentality, you step out of the suffering mentality. And I'm not saying you will be happy forever and fully joyful every second of your life. No, but you will have a completely different viewpoint, seeing everything that happens in your life from a very different perspective. And that is the whole point of spirituality, in my opinion. What other questions have we got?
How to get out of that cage? Like, what's the first step to free yourself from that cage?
So going back to the original metaphor here, how to get out of the cage is by becoming bigger, right? So if you imagine the cage being this big, you only fit in there if you look this big. When you grow, you don't even fit in the cage anymore. So the question here is not how to get out of the cage by being tiny still, right? The question here is how do I become bigger so that cage does not limit me anymore? It just can't hold you anymore if you are this big, right? So this is the whole point of what we call spiritual awakening, and not even awakening, spiritual growth, rather, right? This is what spiritual growth is for. Growing your perspective of the world, expanding your limits, expanding your understanding of who you really are. So I'm not just John Smith, who is born to this family, who studied finance, and now I work in, some financial advisory and I earn X per year. And when I die, I'll be earning X per year, and this is kind of it. And this is my life, right? John, this guy is still in there. So how does he expand? He expands by, okay, first he sees this book, which says, oh, humans have energy centers. Oh, okay, I have energy centers. What does each one of them mean? Oh, maybe my heart is a bit blocked. What do I do to unblock my heart? And then he starts reading another book, which says, okay, your heart is this and that, and maybe your inner child is still trapped and suffering within your heart. And maybe there are some other issues that you had with your mother when you were growing up, and then you had some other pains and sorrows when you were a teenager. And every time John looks into his heart, into his real wounds and real emotions and feelings, his heart starts to grow. And that's a good first kind of step in a sense, because this is what becomes part of a big process of completion. So then John starts to see other people as well differently. He starts seeing the people as also human beings who have feelings and who have hearts and who are experiencing certain things. And maybe he starts treating them differently as well. So there's a ripple effect as well. When John starts to awaken, people around him also start to feel better in his presence. Maybe he starts to behave differently towards his colleagues, and he starts to be almost like he changes his behavior, and something changes along in his job as well, in his friendship groups. And maybe suddenly he meets another person, and that person says, oh, let's go to this retreat in India. And he's a bit like, okay, now I'm open to this kind of thing. Maybe I should go. And then during this retreat in India, I mean, I'm making it up. You don't need to go to a retreat in India to have any form of awakening, but still, let's go with this. So he goes to retreat in India. There he has some visceral physical sensation of soul being within his body, of the fact that he, John, is not just a profession, a name, a family, and intellect. He has suddenly a feeling, a sensation that there is more to what he is, to who he is, that he's carrying some form of spark of the divine within him. And having that kind of sensation is, I guess, what can be the base level of awakening. And then you can't unknow it. You can't unsee it. So from there, John is like, oh, okay, so I've got all this consciousness within me, which is way more than my intellect. And that is a shocking realization. And then he is like, okay, what do I do with my life now? And then maybe he rethinks his career path. Or maybe he opens up some kind of creative streak in him and starts doing writing poems on the side, or something else changes again in his real life. So the growth from there to there happens in very small steps, in many increments. You can't just immediately become that. But stepping out of the cage does not require the full growth. Stepping out of the cage requires the realization that you can and the free will. That's That's my answer to that.